shall maintain that our happiness must not be judged until after our death. No man should be called happy till his death. Always we must await his final day, reserving judgment till he's laid away. Children know the story of King Croesus in this connection, who, having been captured by Cyrus and condemned to death on the point of execution, cried out, O Solon, O Solon! When this was reported to Cyrus, he inquired what it meant, and was given to understand that Croesus was now verifying at his own expense the warning that Solon once had given him, that men, however fortune may smile on them, cannot be called happy until they have been seen to spend the last day of their lives, because of the uncertainty and variability of human affairs, which the slightest shift changes from one state to another entirely different. And therefore Agesilaus said to someone who called the king of Persia happy because he had come very young to such a powerful estate, yes, but Priam at his age was not unhappy. Kings of Macedon, successors to the great Alexander, are made into carpenters and clerks at Rome, tyrants of Sicily into schoolmasters at Corinth. The conqueror of half the world and emperor of many armies becomes a miserable suppliant before the good-for-nothing officers of a king of Egypt. So much did it cost the great Pompey to prolong his life 5 or 6 months, and in our father's time, Ludovico Sforza, 10th Duke of Milan, whose will moved all Italy for so long, was seen to die a prisoner at Loches, and that only after living there 10 years, which is the worst part of his bargain. The fairest of queens, widow of the greatest king in Christendom, has she not just died by the hand of an executioner? There are 1,000 such examples, for it seems that as storms and tempests, he's talking about Mary Strutt, widow of Francis, decapitated February 1587. For it seems as storms and tempests are provoked to humble the pride and loftiness of our buildings, so there are spirits up above who are envious of grandeurs here below. Such havoc on human things some hidden power wreaks, tramples the gleaming rods, fierce axes, all that speaks of human eminence, and laughs them all to scorn. And it seems that fortune sometimes lies in wait precisely for the last day of our life, to show her power to overturn a moment what she has built up over many years. It makes us cry out after Laberius, truly this day I have lived one day longer than I should have. In this sense, Solon's good advice may reasonably be taken. But inasmuch as Solon is a philosopher, one of those to whom the favors and disfavors of fortune rank as neither happiness nor unhappiness, and grandeurs and powers are accidents of almost indifferent quality, I find it likely that he was looking further, and meant that this same happiness of our life, which depends on the tranquility and contentment of a well-born spirit, and the resolution and assurance of a well-ordered soul, should never be attributed to a man until he has been seen to play the last act of his comedy, and beyond doubt the hardest. In everything else there may be sham. Fine reasonings of philosophy may be a mere pose in us, or else our trials, by not testing us to the quick, give us a chance to keep our face always composed. But in the last scene, between death and ourselves, there is no more pretending. We must talk plain French. We must show what there is that is good and clean at the bottom of the pot. At last true words surge up from deep within our breast. The mask is snatched away, reality is left. That is why all the other actions of our life must be tried and tested by this last act. It is the master day, the day that is judge of all the others. It is the day, says one of the ancients, that must judge all my past years. I leave it to death to test the fruit of my studies. We shall see then whether my reasonings come from my mouth or from my heart. I know of many who by their death gave their whole life a good or bad reputation. Scipio, the father-in-law of Pompey, redressed by dying well the bad opinion that people had had of him until then. Epaminondas asked which of three he esteemed most, Chabrus or Epicrates, or himself said, "You must see us die before you can decide. In truth, you would rob a man of much if you weighed him without the honor and greatness of his end. God has willed it as he pleased, but in my time, three of the most execrable and most infamous persons I have known in every abomination of life have had deaths that were ordered in every circumstance composed to perfection. There are gallant, fortunate deaths. I have seen death bring a wonderfully brilliant career, and that in its flower to such a splendid end that, in my opinion, the dead man's ambitions and courageous designs had nothing so lofty about them as their interruption. He arrived where he aspired to without going there, more grandly and gloriously than he had desired or hoped, and by his fall he went beyond the power and the fame to which he had aspired by his career. In judging the life of another, I always observe how it ended, and one of my principal concerns about my own end is that it shall go well, that is to say, quietly and sensibly. That to philosophize is to learn to die. Cicero says that to philosophize is nothing else but to prepare for death. This is because study and contemplation draw our soul out of us to some extent and keep it busy outside the body, which is a sort of apprenticeship and semblance of death, or else it is because all the wisdom and reasoning in the world boils down finally to this point, to teach us not to be afraid to die. In truth, either reason is a mockery, or it must aim solely at our contentment, and the sum of its labors must tend to make us live well and at our ease. As Holy Scripture says, all the opinions in the world agree on this, that pleasure is our goal, although they choose different means to it. Otherwise, they would be thrown out right away, for who would listen to a man who would set up our pain and discomfort as his goal? The dissensions of the philosophic sects in this matter are merely verbal. Let us skip over such frivolous subtleties. There is more stubbornness in wrangling than befits such a sacred profession, but whatever role man undertakes to play, he always plays his own at the same time. Whatever they say, in virtue itself, the ultimate goal we aim at is voluptuousness. I like to beat their ears with that word which so goes against their grain. And if it means a certain supreme pleasure and excessive contentment, this is due more to the assistance of virtue than to any other assistance. This voluptuousness, or being more lusty, sinewy, robust, and manly is only the more seriously voluptuous. And we should have given virtue the name of pleasure, a name more favorable, sweet, and natural, not that of vigor, as we have named it. That other baser sort of voluptuousness, if it deserved that beautiful name, should have acquired it in competition, not as a privilege. I find it less free of inconveniences and obstacles than virtue, besides the fact that its enjoyment is more momentary, watery, and weak, has its vigils, its fasts, and its hardship, its sweat and blood, and more particularly its poignant sufferings of so many kinds, and an accompanying satiety so heavy that it is the equivalent of penance. We are very wrong to suppose that these disadvantages act as a spur and a spice to its sweetness. As in nature, a thing is enlivened by its opposite, and to say, when we come to virtue, that similar consequences and difficulties oppress it, make it austere and inaccessible, whereas much more than in the case of voluptuousness, they ennoble, whet, and heighten the divine and perfect pleasure that virtue affords us. That man is surely very unworthy of its acquaintance who balances its costs against its fruits. He knows neither its graces nor its use. Those who go on teaching us that the quest of it is rugged and laborious, though the enjoyment of it is agreeable, what are they doing but telling us that it is always disagreeable? For what human means ever attained the enjoyment of virtue? The most perfect have been quite content to aspire to it and to approach it without possessing it. But those others are wrong, since in all the pleasures that we know, even the pursuit is pleasant. The attempt is made fragrant by the quality of the thing it aims at, where it is a good part of the effect, and consubstantial with it. The happiness and blessedness that shines in virtue fills all its appurtenances and approaches even to the first entrance and the utmost barrier. Now, among the principal benefits of virtue is disdain for death, a means that furnishes our life with a sort of soft tranquility and gives us a pure and pleasant enjoyment of it, without which all other pleasures are extinguished. That is why all rules meet and agree at this point, and though they all with one accord lead us also to scorn pain, poverty, and other accidents to which human life is subject, it is not with equal insistence, partly because these accidents are not so inevitable. Most men spend their life without tasting poverty, and some also without feeling pain and illness, like Xenophilus, the musician who lived 106 years in complete health, and also because at worst, whenever we please, death can put an end and deny access to all our other woes. But as for death itself, it is inevitable. We are all forced down the same road. Our fate, tossed in the urn, will spring out sooner or late and force us helpless into Charon's bark, passengers destined for eternal dark. Consequently, if it frightens us, it is a continual source of torment which cannot be alleviated at all. There is no place from which it may not come to us. We may turn our heads constantly this way and that, as in a suspicious country. Death always hangs over us like the stone over Tantalus. Our law courts often send criminals to be executed at the place where the crime was committed. On the way, take them past beautiful houses, give them as good a time as you like. Not even a Sicilian feast can now produce for him a pleasant taste, nor song of birds, nor music of the lyre restore his sleep. Do you think that they can rejoice in these things, and that the final purpose of their trip being steadily before their eyes will not have changed and spoiled their taste for all these pleasures? Do you, he hears it as it comes, counts days, measures the breadth of life upon their length, tortured by coming death. The goal of our career is death. It is the necessary object of our aim. If it frightens us, how is it possible to go a step forward without feverishness? The remedy of the common herd is not to think about it, but from what brutish stupidity can come so gross a blindness? They have to bridle the ass by the tail. Who sets his mind on moving only backward? It is no wonder they are so often caught in the trap. These people take fright at the mere mention of death, and most of them cross themselves at that name, as at the name of the devil. And because death is mentioned in wills, don't expect them to set about writing a will until the doctor has given them their final sentence. And then, between the pain and the fright, Lord knows with what fine judgment they will concoct it. Because the syllables struck their ears too harshly and seemed to them unlucky, the Romans learned to soften it or spread it out into periphrases. Instead of saying he is dead, they say he has ceased to live. He has lived. Provided it is life, even past life, they take comfort. We have borrowed from them our late Mr. John. Perhaps it is true that, as the saying goes, the delay is worth the money. I was born between 11 o'clock and noon on the last day of February 1533, as we reckon time now, beginning the year January. The year in January. It was only just 2 weeks ago that I passed the age of 39 years, and I need at least that many more. But to be bothered meanwhile by the thought of a thing so far off would be folly. After all, young and old leave life on the same terms. None goes out of it otherwise than as if he had just entered it. And besides, there is no man so decrepit that, as long as he sees Methuselah ahead of him, he does not think he has another 20 years left in his body. Furthermore, poor fool that you are, who has assured you the term of your life, you are building on the tales of doctors. Look rather at facts and experience. By the ordinary run of things, you have been living a long time now, and by extraordinary favor, you have passed the accustomed limits of life. And to prove this, count how many more of your acquaintances have died before your age than have attained it. And even for those who have glorified their lives by renown, make a list, and I'll wager I'll find more of them who died before 35 than after. It is completely reasonable and pious to take our example from the humanity of Jesus Christ himself. Now he finished his life at 33. The greatest man that was simply a man, Alexander, also died at that age. How many ways has death to surprise us? Leave aside fevers and pleasures. Who would ever have thought that a Duke of Brittany would be stifled to death by a crowd as that Duke was at the entrance of Pope Clement, my neighbor, into Lyons? Haven't you seen one of our kings killed at play? And did not one of his ancestors die from the charge of a hog? Aeschylus, threatened with the fall of a house, takes every precaution in vain. He gets himself killed by a sort of roof, the shell of a tortoise dropped by a flying eagle. Another dies from a grape seed, an emperor from the scratch of a comb while combing his hair, Aemilius Lepidus through stumbling against his threshold, and Aufidius through bumping against the door of the council chamber on his way in. and between women's thighs. Cornelius Gallus, the praetor, Delignius, captain of the watch at Rome, Ludovico, son of Gato de Gonzaga, Marquis of Mantua, and still worse, the Platonic philosopher Speusippus, and one of our popes. Poor Babius, a judge in the act of granting a week's postponement to a litigant, has a seizure, his own term of living having expired, and Caius Julius, doctor, is anointing the eyes of a patient when along comes death and closes his. And if I must bring myself into this, a brother of mine, Captain St. Martin, 23 years old, who had already given pretty good proof of his valor, while playing tennis, was struck by a ball a little above the right ear, with no sign of contusion or wound. He did not sit down or rest, but 5 or 6 hours later he died of apoplexy that this blow gave him. With such frequent and ordinary examples passing before our eyes, how can we possibly rid ourselves of the thought of death and of the idea that at every moment it is gripping us by the throat? What does it matter, you will tell me, how it happens, provided we do not worry about it? I am of that opinion, and in whatever way we can put ourselves in shelter from blows, even under a calf's skin, I am not the man to shrink from it, for it is enough for me to spend my life comfortably, and the best game I can give myself I'll take, though it be as little glorious and exemplary as you like.